Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very warm welcome to this second plenary session. My name is Helen Shenton. I'm the Librarian and College Archivist at Trinity College Dublin, and I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing our 5 speakers. And just to give you just a sense of the rhythm of what we're going to do. So we'll start off with Ciara McCaffrey for 20 minutes. And then we're delighted to have one of our platinum sponsors for 5 minutes, which is going to be a real challenge. But Richard Burkitt is up for that. Then we have Stuart Hunt from the University of Reading for 20 minutes. And then we have our second platinum sponsor, Tracy Moore from ProQuest. Again, thank you so much for all your support as our sponsors. And then we're going to finish with John Cox from Galway. Then there'll be, for another 20 minutes. There's about 5 minutes for questions at the end, but I've been asked to say, anyone who's worried about the 5:15 bus, it will wait. Okay, so you don't have to leave at all. It's there for you. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ciara McCaffrey, who has come a long way from the University of Limerick. And she's going to, this is more of a sort of a reflection session this afternoon. Where do we go to from here, Ciara?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you all, and thank you, Helen. It's just great to see everyone here in person in Limerick after the most extraordinary 2 years of our lives. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to reflect on what we, our libraries, and our library users have experienced over the last 2 years. I find myself thinking a lot about what has changed in higher education and libraries, possibly forever. But before I launch into it, I would just like to acknowledge the tragedy of COVID. With 15 million lives lost worldwide and the possibility that people in this room have been affected in ways that I can't imagine. I will be talking about how libraries in many ways turned a crisis into an opportunity, but that doesn't detract from the terrible experience of the last few years for so many. But for today, I'm going to look back a little and look forward a little, reflecting on the pandemic experience, and I'm posing some questions that I'm certainly thinking about, but don't have the answers to as yet. There we go. So the future that I'm thinking about isn't too far into the future, but it is the future of the pandemic generation. These are a subset of Generation Z, those whose education has been dramatically disrupted in the last few years. Some are already our students, some are coming up into us in the next few years, and some are like my children. They'll hopefully be coming to university in the next 5 to 10 years. These kids don't remember a time pre-internet or pre-smartphones, and the younger members of the pandemic generation probably won't remember a time pre-COVID. Their digital engagement, both socially and educationally, soared in the last few years, and there is no going back to previous times for them. So what will these students need and want from their university library? I'm going to take the big 4 in libraries: collections, spaces, services and staffing, reflecting on where they were pre-COVID, what happened during COVID, and then a little bit of speculation about where we go from here. I'm looking at it through the lens of digital transformation, no longer an add-on but an absolute imperative. COVID ensured that digital is critical and is everywhere. And I'm drawing on sources from organisations that have been thinking along the same lines. And I'll also draw on the University of Limerick because it's my home institution. But when I say we today, I mean all of us here in this room, connecting online, librarians in higher education in Ireland and abroad. Because while we've had different experiences, we've had commonalities as well in how the library world responded during COVID. So let's get stuck in. Collections. Well, where were we pre-pandemic? We were well on our way towards digital. Journals had made the move from print to electronic in the 90s, and how our users used them and how we managed them radically changed forever. The same transition for books was often predicted, but was much slower. Adoption of e-books was very mixed, as we all know, due to convoluted platforms, tricky access models, difficult acquisition processes, and very mixed user experiences. The digital shift turned into a digital jettison. Change. Why isn't it changing? There we go. When COVID came along. And the barriers that made ebooks problematic were no longer easy for us to ignore. Ebook ordering became the default for many of us, and ebook use became the default for our students. Many libraries, including UL, significantly increased our ebook collections, and some, including UL, ventured into the kind of unknown world of e-textbooks that we were vaguely aware of pre-COVID, but had the luxury of being able to ignore. One of the UL's significant developments during COVID was the introduction of our new electronic reading list service, where we integrated Leganto into the students' virtual learning environment. We built reading lists for over 2,000 taught modules, and what that meant is that our students could connect to their reading lists, predominantly electronic, within their virtual learning environment, within that environment that they do most of their study and teaching. It's been quite transformative in how we manage our teaching and learning collections, and is one that's set to continue post-pandemic. The open movement took a giant leap forward, as we know, in COVID, when all of a sudden everyone understood the absolutely critical need for open access to scientific research that was done and produced kind of quickly. Science and vaccine research saved the world. It enabled us to be here in this room today. There's no doubt about that. And open access played a fundamental part in that story. The other developments during COVID with collections were around us trying to find ways to get our print collections to our users as quickly as we possibly could. So those were around posting books out, scan and deliver, click and collect. There were interlibrary loan developments. In UL's case, Rapid ILL was introduced and the digital content store, and then a huge surge in the digitisation and digital access of unique and distinct collections when those doors closed. So where do we go from here with collections? One thing that is certain is the much higher digital expectations that our users will have. 2 years of almost no access to print books means that ebooks are now the norm for most of our students. A steady decline in the use of print books over the past decade has turned into a plummet, and a steady increase in the use of ebooks has turned into a major leap forward. Expectations around digital collections are and will be incredibly high. Digital access to unique material, easy access, easy searching, discoverability will be assumed. Open access to everything will be assumed. I agree with Chris, a digital focus first, not a digital only focus, but a digital first focus has to continue to be our priority, where we prioritise essential teaching and learning at one end of the spectrum and unique and rare collections at the other. But this does pose some questions into the future. How do we meet these incredibly high expectations? And if not immediately available electronically, will the pandemic generation look any further for it? This is a huge one for libraries. What will be the impact of ebooks? Where we don't own them, we can't effectively loan them, we can't preserve them, we can't sometimes afford them, and in some cases we're not even allowed to buy them. And related, what is the future for print? Think for a second about your print journals. Where are they and who uses them? If print books follow the same path as print journals and e-books follow the same path as e-journals, what will our libraries of the future look like? So while you're pondering that, let's move on to space, also related to collections. Pre-pandemic, library spaces were changing, as you all know. For the last decade or more, library buildings have been focused more on the user and less on the collections. In UL's new library that opened in 2018, our high-intensity storage solution meant that we could provide 1,000 of our 2,200 seats on collaborative spaces, technology-enhanced, innovative new spaces, designed with changing pedagogies and new ways of learning at their centre. It was utterly inconceivable when the doors closed. For us, our lovely new library, which had barely been open a year and was designed for a substantial amount of collaboration, was now closed. In the early days of lockdown, it did prompt some questions, certainly in my mind. Would library spaces permanently be out of business? Would our users find that digital was better, that they could study at home more effectively, collaborate on Zoom? Maybe they wouldn't need libraries anymore. Far from it, as we all know. It turns out that the things that drew people to library spaces were needed more than ever: peace and quiet, good Wi-Fi, sanctuary. The concept of digital poverty surfaced as an issue, as did the great differences in people's home spaces, caring responsibilities, and so on. And libraries came to the rescue. With seat booking, social distancing, all collaborative seating removed, the library of the 1950s was back. And when restrictions were lifted, students came back with a bang, back studying alone, back collaborating up close and personal, and we, or certainly I, breathed a sigh of relief. So where do we go from here with spaces? Campuses will change because of COVID. Big lectures have proven they can be done better and more efficiently online. And what that will mean is that campuses will be focusing on activities that can be done better in person. What that means is labs, group works, interaction, collaboration, creation. For libraries, it's providing high-end, out-of-reach technology for users to teach, learn, and research in new ways. That means, as is the case in UL, spaces like digital scholarship, our data visualization lab, our makerspace, spaces for audio and media production. One really interesting trend is immersive tech, or XR, that's virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. The potential for immersive technology in teaching, learning, and research is breathtaking. If you have never used an Oculus and you ever got an opportunity to do it, take it. Virtual reality and mixed reality will eventually blur the lines between physical and virtual spaces, and libraries need to be ready for that. So some questions about the future and spaces. Will blended learning change how our libraries are used? Will we see a drop in our numbers over time because students are doing more of their study online at home? Or will we see an increase in demand for individual spaces so that they can attend online lectures on campus while in the library? What do we need to rethink? It's very early days yet, but I think early indications are suggesting maybe now that everybody has their own device PCs, PC banks. We might need to keep an eye on those. Maybe laptop lending is another. Don't groan, but the scientists all seem to be in agreement that there are pandemics in our future, so we do need to think about that and be ready and prepare. And what do our students need from library spaces now? To learn, yes, but also perhaps to reconnect, to develop possibly stunted social skills, to heal. As Helen said this morning, there is a growing recognition of the impact of the pandemic on our young people's mental health. So that's prompting thinking around well-being spaces and around libraries as social infrastructure. How can we provide our spaces to people to provide opportunities for belonging and connection that were absent during COVID? On to services. Services had been digitally transforming as well, like the others, for the last decade, particularly with self-service, which we moved to more than a decade ago, like many sectors. And we had online services, but we were very heavily in person in our desk services, our teaching, our liaison, our special collections and research support. During COVID, the biggest change was all of these services went online overnight. And I think a lot of positives came from that. Our librarians delivered training to bigger audiences online than they have ever had in person. We developed our chat services. Our online inquiry service became the single port of call for all contacts and all queries. And early in the pandemic, relatively early compared to others on campus, our desk staff returned to in-person services. So where we go from here with services, the trend with libraries pre-COVID was to rearrange themselves in many libraries, to reorganise their services and their structures to align better with university functions and strategies. In the supporting teaching and learning, obviously educational technology, embedding services in the virtual learning environment and digital learning really took off and will continue as a major priority. Digital skills is a national priority now as well as an institutional one for our students and for our future, our next generation. Space as a service is a trend that we're certainly kind of going with in UL, and we're about to loan technology, quite high-end technology, to allow students to create in new and different ways. In supporting research, It's for, obviously, students and staff who are further along in their academic career, needing kind of more expert, quite resource-intensive support in areas like open research, research data management, digital scholarship, systematic searching, and so on. And then, not that far into the future, it's actually already here, we just can't see it, is the potential for artificial intelligence to significantly change not just library services, but academic activity more broadly. So some service questions into the future. What is the future for in-person services? I'm thinking about our desks, our teaching, our liaison. Should we be doing more of it? Should we be doing less of it? More properly asked, really, is what will our students want in this space? What skills do our students really need? This is a question that I think about every time I open the newspaper in the morning, partly because I'm very aware that Generation Z don't open the newspaper in the morning. They get their news predominantly from social media. That is a terrifying thought. It's an environment where false information was certainly responsible for deaths during COVID, and where disinformation is seriously threatening democracies throughout the Western world. And I really wonder if we as a profession should be doing more to use our trusted neutral position to teach our young people how to critically appraise and manage the information, not just scholarly information, but all of the information that they are constantly being bombarded with. And last but not least, us and our wonderful staff. Well, where were we pre-pandemic? Bizarrely, we were all working in the same building at the same time, which seems like a very strange concept now. I hardly need to tell you what happened during the pandemic because we've all been through it. But just to bring you back, this month 2 years ago, on the 18th of May, the regulations were changed and we were allowed to go from 2 kilometres to 5 kilometres. The elderly were allowed to leave their homes for the first time as long as they stayed outside and didn't meet anyone. And retail, the big retail outlets, DIY shops and gardening centres were the first to be allowed to open. But this was also us, this time 2 years ago. This is a subset of UL library staff. And I'm conscious it could be a group of any library. There's any library that has pictures like this. We put this picture together for our students as they were approaching probably the most stressful exams of their lives. We figured out how to work exclusively from home, at times double jobbing and triple jobbing as teachers, childminders and carers. We experienced the fastest mass upskilling programme of our lifetimes when we all learned how to use Zoom overnight and our librarians were teaching online within weeks. It's easy to forget just how unthinkable that was to many of us pre-COVID. It's also easy to forget the emotional toll that COVID took on all of us. It was very tough times. So where do we go from here with staffing? The world of work has changed radically. There's no doubt about it, and there's no going back. Hybrid working has and will continue to significantly change our teams. From day-to-day teamwork, recruitment, from orienting new staff, training and development of our existing staff, communications and staff well-being, not to mention how it might change practical things like space, office provision, workspaces, staff rooms. Questions about staffing and where we go from here. Oh, did I go backwards? Go next. How do we create connections in a hybrid world? Hearing about people's children, their pets, their gardens, their sad times and their happy times. That was a social glue that is very hard to replicate in a hybrid working world, but that is important. What's the future for conferences and networking? It's wonderful to be here in an in-person conference, but with travel issues, fuel costs, climate change, maybe budgetary restraints, it is hard to imagine a full return to online conferences. We've more online access to international conferences, which has expanded our thinking, but is reducing our personal networks, I think. And what does the future, librarian of the future, look like? This is not a picture from the University of Limerick. Pretty much every other picture I have is, this isn't, I would like to point out. But I really like this quote, which came from a report that the Pew Institute published a couple of months ago about what the internet of 2035 would look like. And they didn't explicitly mention librarians, But they did say that a new class of professionals, coders, information curators, literacy advisors, will arise to help digital platforms encourage democratic behaviours. They will enable a culture of accountability in parts of the internet that is deeply trusted. And that is a future that I hope that we are part of as a workforce. So where do we go from here? Well, at this point, post-pandemic, I think we have more questions than answers. In trying to answer them, I'd suggest that the future is to work collectively, whether we're solving the ebook crisis, progressing open access, digitising collections, or sharing expertise. Our strength has always been, and is even more so now, in our collective. We need to keep an eye on the data, evidence and trends. We've only had one somewhat normal semester post-COVID, so it is too soon to be making decisions, but we do need to keep a close eye on what the data is telling us. And critically, we need to ask our users about their experiences, their learning behaviours and their information needs and how they've changed. I'm very conscious that the students going into final year in September in UL will be the last students that have pre-COVID education and memories of that. So when they leave this time next year, their before and after insight will be gone with them. So even though I don't have the answers, I do have great hope for the future of libraries. We've been digitally shifting for years, and in a global crisis, we've proven just how agile, resilient, committed, and digitally transformative we can be. Libraries didn't just survive the pandemic, we thrived. We are living in strange, unprecedented times, and who knows what is next. But based on our past and recent performance, our commitment to our library users, and to the enduring purpose of libraries, I think we can be optimistic that the future of academic libraries is bright. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ciara. That was, you finished on the second. So your challenge, that Ciara finished to the second,